Welcome back to Tipping Point. I'm your host, Kara McKinney. Reparations in our current political context are inherently immoral, whether it's $1 or $14 trillion. But unfortunately for us, that latter dollar figure wasn't some crazy hyperbolic number I picked at random. That's the actual dollar figure that New York Squad member Congressman Bowman wants to put you, the taxpayer, on the hook for. It's kind of funny how Bowman likened his plan to all the COVID spending or even the space race, as if to say that he knows that'll bankrupt the nation, but that he doesn't care as long as he benefits from the pain and destruction. He even had the nerve to say, "Where did the money come from? We spent it into existence," in reference to COVID and the space race. Well, Jamal, why do you think we haven't been back to the moon? Why did we shut down our space shuttle in 2014 and start hitching rides with the Russians to the International Space Station? Because these projects are expensive for little to no monetary return. The 60s also gave us the Vietnam War, LBJ's war on poverty, race riots, and mass changes to immigration, all very, very expensive. And guess what? American wealth and prosperity began its steady decline from that point onward, with periods, of course, of revival in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, but interspersed with great economic recessions. It's so bad now that we call the American dream of one day owning a home and raising a family in it the American nightmare, because of how out of reach it feels for most people these days. But again, Bowman doesn't care. The point here is to keep reviving race tensions. As the great economist Thomas Sowell says, quote, "Racism is not dead, but it is on life support, kept alive by politicians, race hustlers, and people who get a sense of superiority by denouncing others as racist," end quote. And the second point here for Bowman is that Democrats are very good at rewarding their friends and punishing their enemies. In this case, the idea is to rob the middle class to publicly give to a demographic that votes solidly blue as a reward for their votes. It also gives the left another excuse to create yet more vast bureaucracies in order to oversee the collection and allocation of such reparation money, thereby rewarding even more of their voters with cushy government jobs to bleed dry their political enemies. It doesn't matter how the bill is vaguely written to say that America has a moral and legal obligation to provide reparations for the enslavement of Africans and its lasting harm on the lives of millions of black people in the United States. The vagueness leaves us with the same questions. Are only white people or non-black people more generally going to be taxed? How much black ancestry do you need in order to qualify for the money? Because I have some black ancestry. Do I qualify? What ethnicities count as black and which ones don't? Does Elon Musk count as an African immigrant? Is the money only going toward those whose families were here during slavery? What about the millions who've immigrated here in recent decades? But again, it doesn't matter because the left wins out in two ways by keeping this inane argument in the headlines periodically. It keeps the idea of racism alive, and it openly shows that those who vote Democrat will be rewarded and those who don't will be punished. Maybe for the good of our country, someone should pull the fire alarm on Bowman's House bill before any votes can happen. Joining us now to discuss is Giancarlo Canaparo, a senior legal fellow at the Edwin Meese III Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation. Giancarlo, thanks for being here tonight.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Great. So Congressman Bowman says this can be done without raising taxes on anyone. Is that possible, or did I miss something here?
Well, in a technical sense, he's right. You can always just print more money, which is his solution to this. But of course, as we all know, inflation is a tax, just a sort of indirect tax. But the real problem here is not that it's expensive and logistically a nightmare and racially divisive and illegal, but the real problem is that it's manifestly unjust. To take money from people who have done no wrong and to give it to people who can prove no injury is just manifestly unjust. And that's why reparations proposals have to be justified by sort of magical language like systemic racism or the lingering effects of slavery, none of which you'll ever find elucidated or proved. And that just sort of underscores how arbitrary and unjust these sorts of proposals are.
It really is, and it was interesting in the vagueness of how they kind of crafted the language on this. They were talking about African enslavement, but then they kind of switched to Black Americans. And the reason why I point that out is because, with these reparations talk, what if, you're someone who is of Black ancestry, but your family moved here within the last 50 years from a different nation? Your family wasn't here, wasn't in Virginia, wasn't in any of the slave states.